plausible case of genocide, yet our governments are still supporting the Israeli government. And in the Global South, most people think that this is double speak. These are double standards. Do we defend the international law or not? So that's one of the parts of the decline of the West on all levels. We are moving into multipolar order. And now we have a choice here. We can either choose to go for escalation with China, with Russia, to engage, even as some would like to see it, in unwinnable wars with these nuclear powers, which would mean that we will all go down together. Or we could accept a multipolar world. We could accept that we are not calling the shots anymore in the West, and that would mean to engage in diplomacy, even with governments that we do not like. That would mean that we participate in building a new peace order. So these are the choices that we have. The second limit I'd like to talk about is the economy. I've talked about the extreme inequality at the beginning. Now, extreme inequality is not only unjust, it's a problem for the capitalist system. Now, it has been extremely successful for the richest people that we have transferred our production to low-wage countries, that we have squeezed workers, that we have demolished trade unions, that we have transferred profits to tax havens. All that was very successful for people like Jeff Bezos. But for the system, it's a problem, because at the end of the day, people don't have the money in their pockets to buy up all the goods and services which have to grow in the logic of the system eternally for profitable prices. There is a structural purchasing power problem in the system, and that means that more and more people and governments have to get indebted to keep the system running. Now, debts create bubbles, and bubbles have the nasty habit to burst at some date, like 2008. And then the costs are just imposed on ordinary people, and that makes things worse. So we are in a vicious circle. And that's the main reason for the political disintegration, for the turmoil, for the upheaval that we see politically. Now again, we have a choice here. Either we go for what some have called neo-feudalism. What does neo-feudalism mean? It means that corporations own everything, and they do not get paid for producing things, but just for owning things. Take rents. In Berlin, the city where I come from, people now have to pay 50 or 60% of their income for rents, for people who put their money into tax havens in the Bermudas or wherever. And that's just squeezing people. We have the same with land, water, communication, access to public services, which are more and more privatized. At the end of the day, we pay corporations just to exist, not even for buying things, just to exist. And states, by the way, are propping up these corporations. The International Monetary Fund says that states are subsidizing the fossil fuel industry by the incredible number of 5,900 billion euros every year. So the state, in fact, is financing these corporations. Many of them are structurally bankrupt, and we, taxpayers, are financing the system. It's not a market. It's not a market. It's just neo-feudalism. So that's one option. The other option is to create an economy that doesn't work for profit and not for rents, but for the common good, a people's economy. And for this purpose, we need different economic institutions that can replace corporations. And we have these institutions. We have cooperatives. We have public enterprises. We don't have to invent new institutions. It's not a question that we don't have the institutions. It's power, a question of power. And not of the institutions, and we need new economic policy frameworks. There are many good proposals for that. For example, the economy for the common good, which rewards enterprises that work for the common good and that do not work for profit, and penalizes enterprises that work against the common good. Now, it's doable. The third limit that I would like to talk about is political control. I mentioned already that the trust in political institutions is plummeting as they fail to solve our problems and fail to deliver a minimum of justice. They are perceived as working just for the rich few and not for the many. So liberal democracies all over the planet are in a deep crisis. Now, we have to bear in mind, however, and that I talk about in the book extensively about that liberal democracies originally were not invented to truly represent the people. Let's take the American Constitution, which became the model for all the liberal democracies. The main author of the American Constitution was James Madison. And James Madison remarked, I quote, "The government ought to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority." And the American Constitution was designed in a way that the great landowners called the shots, and poor people, women, indigenous people, and black people were outside the system. Now, social movements for 200 years fought back, and they were successful in getting more democracy in Europe as well as in the US and elsewhere. But in the 1920s and 1930s, after World War I, when social movements, the workers' movements, were very strong, and the option was there to vote out the system, then the elites, the economical and political elites in Europe, opted for fascism, to destroy democracy, to save capitalism. That was basically the issue. So we have to bear that history in mind. Now today we are again facing a choice. I'm not talking about the choices we often have at the ballot boxes between fascists on the one hand and authoritarian neoliberals on the other hand. I'm talking about real choices. And the real choice, I think, is that we either go down the path of authoritarian neoliberalism or authoritarian neo-feudalism, as I would call it, or we reinvent and deepen our democratic institutions. And again, we have these possibilities. Switzerland is working with direct democracy. It's not always delivering the outcomes I would like, but it's working better, I think, than in other countries. We have a lot of experiences now with citizens' councils. They work quite well, and they can be scaled up. So we have different institutions that we could use to overcome the limits of representative democracy. So, of course, all this is not happening like that today, but I'm talking about a transition, as a crisis of civilization that is moving to become something completely different. And these are the issues, I think. And the fourth limit, and that's the biggest one, is nature itself. The megamachine was based on the idea that humans can control and dominate nature. In the early days of early science, in the early 17th century, the image for that, the metaphor was the world as a machine, nature as a machine. So the idea was biological systems are machines. The physical world is a machine, and we are the masters. We, as engineers, we can run the machine. Now this idea has collapsed. First of all, it has collapsed within the sciences. I've written about that in my last book, which is called The Stuff We Are Made Of, Reinventing Societies and Nature, which was published in Germany a couple of years ago. I call about this this development in the natural sciences, in physics and in biology and in other sciences, that we see that nature is not a machine. It's a wrong idea. But we see it also in a very concrete way when we look at the news, when we look at the weather, for example. Storms, wildfires, floods, droughts, heat waves, as never seen before. When we look at these, the idea that we can dominate nature is clearly collapsing. Our technologies prove largely powerless against these forces. And the lesson to be learned here is that a subsystem like human societies or economies, can never dominate the larger system, which is the biosphere. We are part of the biosphere. We are a subsystem of the biosphere. We can never dominate the biosphere. That's the lesson to be learned. And again, here we have a choice as well. Either we continue on the path of the deadly illusion that we can control nature with pesticides, genetic engineering, even geoengineering, unchained artificial intelligence, and the rest of it, leading into a tech dystopia that Hollywood has already abundantly depicted, or we could opt for collaboration with complex living systems. And again, there are lots of experiences with that. We can take inspiration from indigenous cultures, from permaculture, and there's also regenerative agriculture that is developing, which is much more than organic or sustainable agriculture because it tries to regenerate the biosphere. Now, in all these cases, whether it's a new peace order, an economy that works for the people, real democracy, or the regeneration of the biosphere, there are still options. Now, when you ask me whether it's realistic that these options are taken, I do not know. But what I do know, however, is that the system is becoming more and more unstable and chaotic. And from the study of chaotic systems, we know that chaotic systems can be influenced even by small movements. Small movements within a chaotic system can have large effects. It's called the butterfly effect. So if a butterfly beats its wings in Florida, it could cause a major tropical storm in Indonesia, for example. That's the butterfly effect. So that's where I want to end. If we become butterflies and organize, we have a certain chance to tip the system in a direction that would lead to a livable future for us all. And yeah, I'm curious to hear your questions and your comments. Thank you very much for listening.
Grazie Fabian per questo tour, questo scoperchiamento proprio del mito dell'Occidente e anche questa reinventare tua capacità, insomma, di indicare la strada per reinventare le istituzioni democratiche, per aprire delle nuove piste. Se c'è qualche domanda, prego, magari se viene al microfono.
First of all, thank you for your inspiring presentation. Just in italiano? Ok. Perfetto, in italiano. Allora, tra i piccoli cambiamenti che potrebbero, diciamo, disinnescare il meccanismo caotico, io vorrei puntare l'attenzione sui media, no? All'inizio, quando vedevamo l'immagine dell'elefante che si formava perché i media erano tutti concentrati sull'idea di farci vedere dei piccoli pezzi e non l'immagine complessiva, ho pensato che c'è un po' l'idea che i media facciano questo perché sono parte del sistema capitalistico in quanto tale. In questo modo viene spesso percepito il ruolo dei media perché sono un'industria, anche loro. Però in realtà oggi il problema è che il modello economico stesso dei media fa sì che vengano remunerati per raccontarci solo i piccoli dettagli, perché è un modello economico tutto concentrato sul presidio dell'attenzione, sull'ora, sul qui e ora. Non c'è mai la contestualizzazione, è proprio perché vengono remunerati, perché devono poi rivendere le nostre eyeballs agli inserzionisti. E quindi io mi chiedo, non può forse essere il trovare un modo diverso di remunerare il racconto stesso della realtà? Se troviamo un modo diverso di remunerare il ruolo dei media, le persone possono giocare un ruolo più importante nel reinvertire questo trend. Grazie.
Mille grazie per questa questione importante. I think the question of media is crucial, it's absolutely essential. And you mentioned that, of course, many media are corporations themselves. And in Germany, for example, 60% of the press is owned by about 6 billionaires. So when billionaires own the press, it's no wonder that you don't read anything about how to expropriate or tax billionaires. So that's one factor. Another is what you mentioned. They are also in this economic need to catch our attention with images of catastrophes, with all these news bits that we get, and to give context doesn't pay. Now, I founded a news organization 15 years ago, which was called Context TV, for that reason. And we had the impression that people really wanted to have more context, but it's difficult to manage such an organization economically. So we have to invent new ways to run media. There are many propositions for that. We could have citizens pay for that in a way that is a little bit like a tax, but not managed by the state, because state media are as dangerous and problematic as corporate media, as you all know. So we need something else. And there's a lot of alternative media, bad ones and good ones, flourishing all over the planet. We were inspired in those days, by the way, by Democracy Now!, which is an American newscast, which is very interesting. It's reaching millions of people, and they are financed only by the spectators. No corporate money, no state money. It's very interesting. They're doing a very good job. So I think we need more of that to really to catch the context. But it's not easy.
Sì, una domanda e prima però un'osservazione. Mentre lei parlava ho pensato ad altre voci critiche e allo stesso tempo costruttive in quella che dovrebbe appartenere alla seconda parte del suo libro, la modernità. La prima voce a cui ho pensato è a quella di Thomas More, il quale protesta fermamente contro un fenomeno molto diffuso nel suo paese nel XVI secolo, le recensioni, enclosures. E proprio nella sua utopia, che è la parte costruttiva, diciamo, del suo pensiero, della sua critica, lui contesta la sottrazione di terra e la recensione, perché queste terre dovevano servire per le pecore, le quali dovevano fare la lana che poi serviva per l'industria tessile, e dice: e così le pecore si mangiano gli uomini, così le pecore diventano più importanti degli uomini, soprattutto dei poveri, perché i poveri andavano in quelle terre per fare la legna e per prendere qualcosa da mangiare, e questa possibilità viene meno. Un'altra voce, questa volta italiana, questa volta nel XVIII secolo. Noi abbiamo avuto la prima cattedra di economia, non politica, ma economia civile a Napoli, e il professore si chiamava Antonio Genovesi, e lui dopo un primo momento in cui subisce l'autorità di uno studioso come Montesquieu e di quello che lui sostiene nello spirito delle leggi, alla fine della sua vita fa una critica molto severa allo spirito del commercio e prende distanze, perché quando a quell'epoca si parlava di commercio si parlava di economia, e prende le distanze dalla concezione economica che c'è nello spirito delle leggi di Montesquieu, e dicendo che l'economia si deve basare sui bisogni e che non può, respingendo l'idea di un commercio dolce. Questa era la dottrina di Montesquieu nello spirito delle leggi. Adesso vengo alla domanda. Qualche sabato e domenica scorsa abbiamo avuto le elezioni in Europa, e so che in Germania è andato diversamente, ma in Italia il primo partito è quello di coloro che non sono andati a votare, il partito di coloro che non hanno votato, che si sono... Vorrei che pensare con lei, sentire con lei, sentire come lei interpreta questo astensionismo, perché da un lato io sento che è una sorta di abbandono, si dice abbandono delle urne. Perché questo abbandono? Questa domanda mi è venuta in mente perché lei ha fatto anche una critica alle democrazie liberali. Questo abbandono, come dobbiamo interpretarlo? Dobbiamo interpretarlo come un abbandono del prendersi cura della Repubblica, oppure ci sono altre interpretazioni?
Mille grazie per questa intervenzione. First of all, I thank you for reminding us that there was so much critical system thinking from the outset. The capitalist system for the last 500 years was accompanied by people who thought, from the beginning, like Thomas More, who said, well, this system is wrong, it's deeply immoral, we need to have other versions. And Thomas More, of course, was who was supposed to vote against pesticides in the EU. What did he do? He didn't vote against them. A green minister. So where should the confidence come from? I mean, people feel that the system is corrupted. And they're not completely wrong. They're not completely right either. So there are some good things happening also on the European level. But I think we have a problem with these institutions. And so that's why I said there are two ways to go. Either to say, well, like in the Weimar Republic in Germany, many people said, well, these parliaments, what are they good for? Let's vote for the authoritarians. That's one way. The other way is to say, well, these so-called liberal democracies, which were not conceived as democracies, but as republics rather, on the Roman model of a republic, they were a step towards democracy, but they are not yet democracy. We have to go further, we have to deepen democracies, we have to engage citizens, and not with symbolic acts. I mean, there are lots of citizens' councils which are just symbolic. No, we have to give people more power in participating in the system on a local level. And we need the principle of subsidiarity, which is very important, that people on a local level have a say on what happens on a local level. So people must feel that they matter, and they don't feel that. In the US, for example, there's been a study, very interesting, that the political opinions and the wishes and the needs of 85% of the people don't play any role in the political decision-making of the United States. Whatever they think, whatever they want, doesn't play any role, whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats in government. And that's why people feel the system is. And that's part of the crisis of civilization. This is a crisis of all our institutions. And I think we have to face that. It's not easy.
Grazie, con questo augurio di democrazie sempre più partecipative salutiamo Fabian Scheidler, ti ringraziamo di essere stato qui e vi aspettiamo al prossimo incontro alle ore 17 con Chiara Bottici, Politica dell'immaginazione. Grazie. Giusto, Fabian Scheidler domani è a Salerno e quindi al Festival di Salerno, il festival per cui per chi di voi abbia amici o voglia fare una scampagnata lo ritrovate lì.